I think I've discovered Kevin Feige's secret plan for the Loki character. And all the evidence is there in the Loki show, but it comes from Marvel Comics. Because you see, I think the Citadel at the end of time is actually the God Quarry from Marvel Comics, and the whole point of the Loki show is to turn Loki into Avenger Prime. And I think after you see all the evidence that I'm going to put forth in this video, your mind will be freaking blown, and you will agree that this is where this is all going. Okay, so first up, let's explain what Avenger Prime is in Marvel Comics. Then let's explain all the evidence from the Loki show that shows that's what Kevin Feige's doing with our Loki. Avenger Prime is an Avenger that exists in an Avengers tower at the end of Infinity in the God Quarry. The identity of Avenger Prime was a mystery that lingered in Marvel Comics over the past couple of years. This character was going around the multiverse assembling a group of multiversal Avengers, and this was all because there was a multiversal group of villains led by the most twisted evil version of Doctor Doom you can imagine, and that group of villains was trying to take over the universe, get the power of the God Quarry, and reshape reality. So basically you had the multiversal masters of evil doing a bunch of multiversal evil stuff, and then you had a bunch of Avengers being recruited into this multiversal group of Avengers by this mysterious guy known as Avenger Prime. It is eventually revealed that the identity of Avenger Prime is Loki, and his story of how he becomes Avenger Prime is crazy. So this is basically a Loki who at a very young age had his brother Thor die. This is when Thor was first trying to use Mjolnir as a hammer. Mjolnir flies Thor into the sun, killing him for whatever reason. And Avenger Prime Loki explains that this was the happiest day of his life back then, and he's ashamed to admit that now. Now this version of Loki ends up becoming the king of Asgard and actually selling Odin to the Frost Giants. It's really crazy. And after a while of ruling Asgard, this all-father Loki gets incredibly bored, doesn't understand why he's unfulfilled and lonely, and so he starts reaching out to other versions of himself within the multiverse. But all of these different versions of Loki end up betraying him and trying to kill him. So he begins to be curious as to why Lokis are all so wicked and betraying. And so he goes throughout the multiverse and starts to witness Lokis just on their own. And he realizes that Lokis always lose. And in fact, they always lose to the Avengers. And the heroes known as the Avengers are always coming together and forming strong bonds in order to defeat a Loki. Now, right away, this should seem very similar to what Mobius tells to Loki in season 1 of Loki when he explains what his real purpose is.
You weren't born to be king, Loki. You were born to cause pain and suffering and death, all so that others can achieve their best versions of themselves.
This all-father Loki, after witnessing this in the multiverse, goes back to his own universe and decides he's going to prevent the Avengers from ever happening. He makes sure there's no Tony Stark. He makes sure there's no Captain America, taking his frozen body and putting it on Jotunheim. He slaughters Wakanda, destroys every half-Kree he can find to prevent Captain Marvel. He eliminates the possibility of the Avengers from his universe. But after he does this, all of the villains that would also be villains to the Avengers, like your Red Skulls, your Galactus, the Mad Celestials, Thanos, all of those bad guys come to Earth and challenge Loki. And in a fight that takes all of Loki's strength and pushes his sorcery past the limits he even thought were possible, he defeats all of these villains. But there's always a cost, and the cost for this sorcery was the life of every person within that universe other than Loki himself. There's this crazy shot we're putting on the screen for you right now with Loki and all these dead bodies floating around him. He literally kills every living thing within his universe. And it's at this point he thinks he will be satisfied, but he's actually more empty and sad and lonely than ever and decides he wants to die. He flies into the sun to repeat the way in which his brother Thor was killed, hoping for the sweet release of death. But instead of dying, he wakes up in the God Quarry, which is this place at the end of Infinity, at the edge of the multiverse. And it is a place that we find out out in the Thanos Wins comic book that you can get to by going through a black hole. So this Loki wakes up there thinking, okay, well, I can turn to stone like all of these other people around here. He prays, but basically the multiverse says, no, Loki, you don't get to die. You don't get off that easy. So instead, you have to go get the multiversal Avengers. So the dude builds an Avengers tower on the God Quarry, and this is when that character starts recruiting the multiversal Avengers. Okay, so that's the explanation of Avenger Prime in Marvel Comics. So why do I think they're doing that with Loki in the MCU? Well, I think the first clue has to do with the Citadel at the end of time being so similar to the God Quarry, which is at the end of Infinity. And again, in that Thanos Wins comic book story, we see that Thanos and Thane go through a black hole in order to get to the God Quarry. And in the finale of the first season of Loki, we have that crazy shot which pulls into that black hole, and that is where the Citadel is and all the timelines. And I just think that's a big visual clue. I also think that it's obvious that the material of this meteor or whatever this landmass is, which the Citadel is built upon, is actually the Citadel being carved out of that material. This actually comes from Kate Huron herself. She talked about this in a behind the scenes feature, saying that the designers made a specific choice to show this Citadel as being carved out of the material on this meteor or whatever it is. I also think this could be connected to the quantum ore, which was something that Eric Voss and New Rockstars pointed out was what Sylvie was looking for in the earlier parts of Loki season 1. She has a quantum ore shovel created by Advanced Idea Mechanics in one of the timelines, and she is trying to find that material. I think it's important to note that the TemPad that He Who Remains uses, and even the technology that he uses to show us his backstory, is all made up of that same material that we see the meteorite and the Citadel at the end of time carved out of. It's even possible that these statues we see are actually other versions of villains or characters that had arrived at the God Quarry and had failed their test and been turned into stone. It's possible that Sylvie knew that this ore did also exist at separate parts of the timeline. Maybe He Who Remains has been slowly ripping away the God Quarry quantum ore over eons in order to power the efforts of the TVA, perhaps even set different timelines into different situations. It's possible that this ore is an incredible power source, maybe the power source of the quantum engine that Kang the Conqueror had in Quantum Mania, or maybe just some crazy quantum cosmic level material that He Who Remains in his infinite wisdom and advanced technology realizes he can utilize to control time. Now, there's also this interesting element of the finale of Loki season 1, where in that intro with the different black holes, we hear a ton of different sounds from throughout the Infinity Saga lines, delivered by all kinds of different characters, including a cry from a baby, which again, shout out to Eric Voss and the New Rockstars team for discovering that it's the exact same cry that baby Loki makes all the way back in the first Thor movie. And we also know just from what He Who Remains says that he has been trying to find a replacement, going through different scenarios for eons and eons, and that it turns out the perfect person to take over for him to be his successor came in two, and that would be the variant of Loki and the variant of Sylvie. So He Who Remains has been watching both of them from birth, and perhaps even been watching them go from birth into their death over and over and over again, depending on how the timelines actually work. But I think what makes these two Lokis different is that they're still losing in order to make other people better, but in this case, they're actually able to do that for each other, or at the very least, Sylvie and maybe some of the experiences with other variants are allowing this main character Loki to change. We can see that in Loki season 2. He is concerned about He Who Remains. He is concerned about the multiversal war, and he says he found the man at the end of time and he made sense. That sounds like the perfect thinking for a person that will take over that job. But now we need to talk rumors, leaks, and speculation. So if you don't want any spoilers for Deadpool 3 or the rest of Loki season 2, get on out of here. Take this all with a grain of salt though, because we don't know for sure how this is going to work out, and due to the strikes and a lot of changes, I think it's possible some of this stuff did change from when it first leaked out. But one of the big rumors about Deadpool 3 is that you were going to see the TVA going around to timelines and rescuing versions of heroes in order to fight in the multiversal war. That is why they are trying to save the different X-Men and bring them back to the TVA despite those timelines being wiped out, so that you're still going to have members of the X-Men and different Avengers able to fight together in the coming multiversal war. And that sounds a lot like what Avenger Prime was doing in Marvel Comics when he was grabbing up all of these different multiversal Avengers in order to fight a multiversal war. Now, another possible big leak and rumor that ties into this all has to do with the fact that there is apparently a person still operating in the Citadel at the end of time that is watching everything that's going down in Loki season 2. This is rumored to actually be a much older version of Sylvie. Essentially, maybe at some point, this Sylvie goes back to the end of time and takes back over, understanding what Loki now understands, that they do need somebody operating there, that despite it having terrible costs and being an impossible job, it has to happen. But I don't think Sylvie is going to remain the He Who Remains at the end of time after this season of Loki, because it feels very similar to what happened with Ravonna and the original Kang, because I believe they essentially tried to make this work together, and there's hints at that within the recording we hear from the past in the first episode of Loki season 2. And just like He Who Remains has to be alone and cannot actually rule with Ravonna, I don't think Loki is going to be able to rule with Sylvie, and will have to kind of make that sacrifice as well, mirroring the loop that He Who Remains is on and allowing this version of Loki to become Avenger Prime, maybe even building an Avengers Tower on the God Quarry, or in the MCU's case, the Citadel at the end of time, and allowing that to be a major fixture for when we get to Secret Wars.